Hello, and welcome to October's Anomaly Academy Cadet Tier Patron presentation for the Anomaly Archives 501c3 nonprofit Anomaly Institute. We're based in Austin, Texas. We're a nonprofit focused on the preservation of materials related to all things anomalous, whether they be the nature of consciousness, psi phenomena, the paranormal, UFOs, the Bermuda Triangle, past life therapy, hypnosis, psychological weirdness. That's all part of the Anomaly Archives. We have over 7,000 books and thousands of periodicals here in Austin, Texas. And if you are joining us, then you are part of our donor population. Thank you so much for being here. Tonight's guest is my good friend, Greg Bishop. I've known him since the mid-1990s when we met through the zine scene, the alternative media zine magazine publishing scene. He was then publishing Excluded Middle magazine, and has always been involved in radio projects and investigating the strange, the mysterious, the weird. Greg is the LA-based author of multiple books on strange subjects, the radio show host and podcast host for Radio Misterioso, and as I said, past publisher of Excluded Middle magazine. He's also a Project Censored Award winner for his reporting on bioweapons back in the day. He's been a consultant on the Conspiracy Zone TV show, and his writing and research includes the acclaimed books Project Beta, The Story of Paul Bennewitz, National Security, and the Creation of a Modern UFO Myth, published in 2005. Always referenced by people in the UFO scene, and boy, is it getting referenced a lot the last few weeks and months for obvious reasons. Weird California is a collection of stories related to weird things in the state of California. He's a contributor to that book, and his writing on the UFO subject appeared regularly at the UFOmystic blog, UFOmystic, and was compiled along with new writing into the book It Defies Language, Essays on UFOs and Other Weirdness. He's also published an anthology collecting the works that were published in the Excluded Middle magazine called Wake Up Down There! It is my pleasure to bring on my good friend, Greg Bishop. How you doing, Greg?
I'm doing good. I hope I'm lit well enough, but most people are going to be watching the slides. Everybody's going to be watching the slides.
Well, you look great, and I'm really excited to hear this presentation. You are always an out-of-the-box thinker. I know for a fact that a lot of people seek you out for your unique perspective on these subjects, and you are definitely the most active person I know in this field. And I just really am always happy to provide a platform to have the opportunity to hear you present. And this tonight's presentation, Can Hard Data and Materialism Solve the UFO Enigma, is right in your wheelhouse. So with that, I'll just go ahead and bring up your presentation and let you get started here.
Okay. This is a presentation that is, I just told Miles, thank you so much, Miles, for that introduction too. I hear all that stuff and I was like, Jesus, that's a lot of stuff. I don't feel active, but Miles is an Anomaly Archive is helping me stay active by presenting some of the stuff I've been thinking about recently, actually in the last few years. I've been kind of pushing for an art and humanities based viewpoint or research into the UFO issue. And it's because my degree's in art history. So it's kind of more in my wheelhouse than science. Science I understand, science I respect. Science is that should never be off the table when looking at the UFO Enigma, but I will get into that as we go on. So let's begin. I got to do two presentations at the same time. So let's go to the first slide. Is it working? There we go. So people ask me, or I've wondered, why is science not a good avenue to solve the UFO issue, or at least give us a great understanding? I actually don't say solve because solve implies that there is one answer. I do not think there's one answer. I think there are many, and there are many roads to get to that. to those answers, or to a better understanding. And I think one of the first mistakes made is we think of UFOs as machines because they look like machines. They look like solid things when people talk about them, sometimes, especially when we have pictures of them. The only photo actually in this is that upper left is Rex Heflin's UFO from 1965, I believe it is, in Santa Ana. And the Adamski saucer. And then, of course, since we're talking about technology, the Bob Lazar, I guess people used to call it the sports model. Anyway, they look like machines, so we treat them as machines. But we don't know if they are or not. Crash saucers and captured technology notwithstanding, which I think is not as simple as people make it out to be. It's a convenient placeholder for us to think of them as machines because they look like that. But should we be thinking of them as machines and considering them as machines that we have to figure out, as if you'd found a clock or some kind of mechanism and took it apart and tried to figure it out? I don't think it's that simple. Even when people do, depictions or drawings of what they think UFOs are, they're filled with all kinds of things that look like a machine, that looks like something that works together to provide lift or to move something around, be they pilots or just the UFOs themselves. So I've given a talk about left and right brain ufology, and I consider the right brain as something that's been the right brain is, if you know what left and right brain are, there's a nice diagram there, the classical definition of it. I don't think these are as simple as being located in certain parts of the brain, but for the purpose of discussion and our purposes here today, we will talk about left and right brain. So as we know, probably most of you know, the left brain is considered the center of logic and math and deduction, all these things. Ufology is pretty much stuck on that side. Creativity, intuition, feeling, imagination, those kind of things are not considered as something to be studied when we're talking about UFOs. And I argue that they're just as important because humans are thinking and artistic, creative beings, no matter what you think of the person next door or whatever. There are those parts of you. Those are the parts that the right brain is what allows you to enjoy music and a movie or a painting or anything that involves appreciation of the creative process. And I think that's an important part of appreciating the enigma that is the UFO. People's lives are changed in minutes by something that they see or experience. The only other thing that can do that I know of is art. Have to be pretty powerful art, though. So let's look at science and what science has been doing with UFOs for the last, 50, 60, 70, 80 years. My friend David Metcalf reminded me about Thomas Townsend Brown in the 1920s. He and an associate, Paul Beifeld, said they had found out a way to, if not be anti-gravity, at least nullify gravity or reduce it by something they called molecular gravitors. In the 1950s, he became the co-founder of NICAP. Everybody here knows what that is, National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena. And he said that his experiments in what he called electrogravitics was had something to do with how flying saucers work, how UFOs work. That is a still from a video you can find online from 1980 of him demonstrating his effect in a vacuum chamber, and then celebrating with champagne, actually. In the 1970s, J. Allen Hynek wrote UFO Experience, a Scientific Inquiry. Obviously, Hynek was the scientist assigned to Blue Book, and after looking at probably literally thousands of UFO reports, he decided that the scientific method couldn't be applied to the UFO issue without the problem being redefined, because he was basically complaining about the Condon Committee and how they went about looking at the UFO subject, and said that it wasn't a threat to national security. It wasn't something which we should be worried about. Because of Hynek's experiences with Blue Book and the people he talked to and the things he saw, he said that the problem was not, it could be a scientific one, but not in the way in the scientific method was being applied, or the UFO issue had to be reassigned in a different way, redefined in a different way, so that science could deal with it. And it had to include the strangeness and the effect on people and the lasting effects. In 1975, this was not published till 1995. There is a wonderful book or a manuscript written by Paul R. Hill, who was a NASA scientist. He had a UFO sighting, and he attempted to explain what observed characteristics of UFOs in terms of the known laws of physics at the time, at least the classical laws of physics, not quantum. He wanted to, read it here. He wanted to present what can be explained of the UFO pattern in terms of today's scientific principles. If much of the pattern can be so explained, those defying the laws of physics will be discredited, making the UFO more understandable and therefore more acceptable. A lot of scientific sense has to be made of the UFO enigma to make UFOs acceptable, though. The pieces of the jigsaw puzzle have to be fitted into place for the point where the casual observer can see the picture forming. What he did in this was describe the quick movement of UFOs in a way that made sense, and said, well, this is not beyond physics. He says he'd seen rockets take off as quickly as UFOs were said to disappear. That doesn't take into account the G-forces, and if somebody were in there and getting smashed to jello. But he did say that as far as he was concerned, and based on his research and his knowledge of movement of physical objects, that most, if not all, UFO movement could be explained in terms of classical physics, which is fine. It doesn't explain all of the UFO problem and things associated with it and the strangeness associated with it, but it was a scientific attempt to explain UFOs as unconventional flying objects. Some people know about this. Dr. Harley Rutledge, who was at the University of, I think, Missouri, he had his own sighting. And so he decided to put together, and these sightings were ongoing in the area where he lived in Missouri. So he decided to organize a team of observers, trained observers, college training, he said. Some had degrees, and others were working on them. But he had spectrum analyzers, telescopes, audio detectors, electromagnetic frequency analyzers, cameras, galvanometer to measure variations in the Earth's field. Started this thing called Project Identification in April 1973, and logged several hundred hours of observation time of these phenomena. It was essentially the first UFO scientific field study. I read some of my notes here just so I don't forget things. To be able to monitor the phenomena in real time, enabling Rutledge and his associates to calculate the object's actual speed, course, position, distance, and size. Observations of an unclouded night sky on the project often revealed pseudo-stars, which were stationary lights camouflaged by familiar constellations. Actually, there's some of that a little later in the talk here. Some objects appeared to mimic the appearance of known aircraft. Others violated the laws of physics. Here we go. The most startling discovery was that on at least 32 recorded occasions, the movement of the lights synchronized with the actions of the observers. They appeared to respond to light being switched on and off and to verbal or radio messages. So this it deepened the mystery. It had some connection to the people observing them, which is important. Most people know about this paper. Jacques Vallée and Eric Davis wrote this paper in 2003. It was published then. Had some really nice points in it, and it addressed the psychic aspect or the paranormal aspect. The feeling of absurdity and contradiction in these two aspects, the physical and the psychic, which they discuss in the paper, has to do with the inadequacy of our language to grasp a phenomenon that defies our attempts at classification. Language is a very important thing here. I'll talk about that a little later. Everything works as if UAPs were the product of technology that integrates physical and psychic phenomena and primarily affects cultural variables in our society through manipulation of physiological and psychological parameters in the witnesses. As we just saw, Harley Rutledge experienced this as well. Very recently, in the last few years, post 2017, I'm using 2017 as a benchmark because of the acknowledged change in attitude after the New York Times article came out 2017, December 2017. This is a paper by Kevin Knuth, Robert Powell, and Peter Reale from the Society for the Scientific Coalition of Ufology. Sorry. And they went back to the physics of it, consistent with flight characteristic required for interstellar travel. They're looking at it as alien craft. If the accelerations were sustainable in space, they could easily reach relativistic speeds within a matter of minutes to hours and cover interstellar distances in a matter of days to weeks, proper time, meaning ship time. I talked about this with Kevin Knuth on my show a while back. And in support of the extraterrestrial hypothesis, which doesn't explain everything, obviously, he said if you could go close to the speed of light, your experience time on a ship that could do this, because of general relativity, would pass for you. It's the grandfather thing. If you get near the speed of light, time slows down for you. What he figured out was that you could live a life, about a human life, 60 to 80 years. You could travel for millions, multi-millions of years, planet time or Earth time or whatever, if you were sitting still on a planet. And it was fascinating. This was something when I was doing research for this talk, I was thinking, hey, Harley Rutledge found this too. Beatrice Villarreal and some associates here wrote a paper, and she's still working on this, on looking at old star not maps, but photos of the night of stars, basically mapping the sky. And she was going back through old photographic plates and noticed that sometimes stars would appear and disappear in between different exposures at different times, which doesn't make any sense unless there's lots of stars blinking in and out. So she is still trying to figure out what the cause for these transient luminous phenomena, or stars or objects disappearing at different times and reappearing or appearing. And it is, she actually mentions something which I don't know if there's a correlation causation problem, but apparently during one of these transient phenomena, it happened at the exact time as the Washington, D.C. Mass sighting in the 1950s. I think she's trying to find out if there were other flaps or other things going on that correlate with these things disappearing or reappearing. This is from the Sol conference coming up next month. It's a paper being presented by Tim Gallaudet. He's a retired Navy Rear Admiral, And he's talking about, why don't we look at USOs, unidentified submerged objects, and transmedium objects traveling between air and water, and how that might be possible. So I'm going to that, and I'm going to listen to this lecture. Maybe get to talk to him about it, I hope. So if we apply the scientific method to UFOs, what do we get? Well, the first part of the scientific method is to, at least as applied in the last couple hundred years, or at least the last 100 years, define a question. If we're talking about UFOs, why don't we ask, what's the origin of UFOs? Easy enough. The question is defined. Gather information and resources. Well, all of the information we have basically is data taken from witness. For the most part, probably 95% of it right now is witness data, observations by humans. Then you form a hypothesis based on this data. We're really hamstrung in our hypothesis about this data because most people figure that UFOs are piloted by aliens from across the galaxy somewhere. And so that really isn't it's a hypothesis based on culture rather than on the actual data. It seems to fit in some ways, in other ways it doesn't. Number 4 is a tough one. Test the hypothesis by performing an experiment, collecting data in a reproducible manner. You cannot reproduce a UFO sighting. I think people are trying to, and have successfully, occasionally, caused UFO phenomena to appear or happen, but not in a way that we think of in classical science, where we can get in a lab or get in some place where we control most of the parameters and run the test again. We can't do that. We can probably, I think I actually said it in the next slide here. We can actually run those repeats by running the data through meta-analysis and probably AI. Analyze the data. Some scientists are using novel methods to analyze the data, like AI. And refining the parameters of that to see what comes up. Interpret the data and draw conclusions that serve as a starting point for a new hypothesis. Well, that's been going on for a long time. Most people interpret it as, most scientists up to now, and others have interpreted it as extraterrestrials. But others like Villet and Mike Masters recently have proposed new hypotheses based on differing sets of data. Outside of the ETH that suggests alternate ideas, such as the psychic component, and as Michael Masters has said, possible time travel. And he presents in a couple of books why he thinks that might be possible. Publish the results. Generally, publishing results of UFO studies have been in UFO magazines and journals for a long time, with varying degrees of accuracy and efficacy and respectability, I guess you want to call it. But that's happening more now as more scientists and academics publish papers on the UFO subject. They've just started in the last few years. It's the start of a new science, I think, or a start of a science that is different than classical science. And retesting. That's a real important part of the scientific, the reproducibility is an important part of scientific method, reproducibility and falsifiability, which means can you prove it wrong? They can't be tested or proven wrong because the parameters and outcomes are not controllable. However, you can take some of this data and run through repeated trials and meta-analysis to see what you come up with, which I think is being done. I just put that in as a joke. We're too stuck in what our models are of reality to imagine what some of the other models of some other consciousness is operating on. May have no relationship to how we look at the world and how we look at reality and how we look at space-time, etc. So let's summarize a bit. So the scientific method, as I just described and as we use it, isn't commensurate with all of the observed properties and effects of UFOs. It's slowly altering its methods, methods and definitions to study something that's so far divided efforts at explanation. But at least it's being taken seriously right now. I never thought I'd see this happen, actually. And this is why I go to conferences where people talk about this in a serious way. It's actually kind of exciting, at least for me. Data alone cannot explain the extreme variance of reported characteristics, and often psychological effects that last, as well as the methods by which they appear and disappear, and may defy many laws of publicly understood physics. I guess that's classical physics, but not quantum physics. Quantum physics actually accounts for some of the observed phenomena. Social sciences have begun to examine the issue from this perspective of cultural effects and belief systems, and I think that's where the crack began. And I'll describe that in a minute, where things started to open up. So physical science may answer the questions of what, when, and where UFOs happen, or at least what's observed. When, obviously, where, obviously, but not who. What consciousness causes these UFOs, causes the reports? Why are they doing it, and how do they do it? I think they're working on the how, but not the who and the why, which is probably smart. Yeah, and since 2017, as I said, there's so many different organizations right now that are studying this and organizing conferences and talking about this from a lot of different perspectives. It seems like SUAPS, the Society of UAP Studies, is kind of well balanced between the humanities and science. Scientific Coalition obviously is just scientists, although they had Julia Mossbridge at their last conference talking about the taboos and why they're there and if they're useful or not and how they affect scientific research. I thought it was really cool and brave of them to do that. Sol Foundation, everything. They have religious studies scholars, scientists, Beatrice Villarreal was at the first one, Avi Loeb, and then they also have people like Diana Pasoka and Jeff Kripal talking about the religious studies, humanities aspect of it. Oh, I found, however, let me start these two things because they're kind of amazing. A lot of these people, at least the people at the top, they look like they're trying to mine the data for clues for new technologies, investment opportunities, intelligence, or military political advantages. The origin, reasons, and consciousness behind the phenomena, the UFO phenomena, are secondary for some of the participants, although I find, and I've talked to many of them, are sincerely interested in these issues. What intelligence is behind the UFO thing? Because they know there is, but they don't want to deal with that yet. I just put these examples of weird technologies up. The one on the left is our autonomous vehicle. Actually, they're not autonomous. I think they're being controlled there. But they just rely on thrust. And these are from the 80s. This isn't something that's going on now. It's probably a lot more advanced than this. And the thing on the right is a holographic projection system where you can put a three-dimensional object in space that can be seen, touched, and actually heard, which has implications for some excitings around military installations and possibly with military personnel and hardware. Oop. So let's what I said about the social sciences, I think that's very important, also closer to what I want to talk about. In 2011, Jeff Kripal brought out his book, Authors of the Impossible. He's written many after this. He began to champion writers and researchers who had been ignored, ridiculed, and dismissed for looking at forbidden subjects, and present them to us and consider them as pioneers in a new way of looking at the unexplained and mysterious, at least what's unexplained and mysterious for us now. And in 2019, actually, the book took a few years to write and a while to get published. So I actually had the wrong date, and I put 2017 at first because that's when I first talked to Diana and realized what she was doing and how important it was. But Diana opened the door for academics, the social sciences academics, and I guess others now at this point, to begin taking the subject seriously as an examination of evolving belief systems. And she's a religious studies professor. So is Kreipel. These two books, to me, signaled a new curiosity about UFOs based on the discipline of the social scientists, and really emphasized, for me at least, that serious people were now taking the subject seriously. Stanton Friedman actually called for this, or predicted it would happen sometime in the 80s or 90s. He was talking about this. I think he was just wishing serious people with serious chops, academic chops and research chops, could take on this subject. And it's happening. Along with my friends Hussein Agrama and David Metcalf, we wrote a review of American Cosmic. It was published in 2022 in an academic journal. And we went through what the significance of the book was, not really taking the book apart and saying, is this right or is this not, but what is the book trying to say? And it was kind of obvious to me when I read the book too, that anyone that came close to the subject matter and took it seriously was changed. Actually, I wrote something about this. The fact that Diana Pasulka dealt with personal transformations of witnesses signaled a new approach, at least to me, I think to everybody. And the fact that the invisible college was becoming less invisible. She made the important point that those who took the phenomenon seriously were irrevocably changed. New and often disturbing implications became evident to them, as long as you took the subject seriously. But I think the book also dealt with the issue that the phenomenon was reflexive, meaning it responds to our awareness of it. Whether that's because it consciously responds or appears to us that way is kind of an open question still. So let's get into the art and creativity part of this. What other methods of inquiry are available to us? Well, this side over here. And let's talk about that. Oh, let's first talk about phenomenology, which I think is a really nice way to frame our ideas here and to go forward. There we go. Phenomenology, and I'll just read this because otherwise I will misrepresent, is a philosophical study and movement of the early 20th century that seeks to objectively investigate the nature of subjective conscious experience. It attempts, think about this in regards to UFO sightings and reporting and research. It attempts to describe the universal features of consciousness while avoiding assumptions about the external world, aiming to describe phenomena as they appear to the subject, the witness, and to explore the meaning and significance of the lived experience. It aims to arrive at an objective understanding of the world via discovery of universal logical structures in human subjective experience, because we're all human. It considers the question of how objectivity is possible at all when the experience of the world and its objects is thoroughly subjective. Far from being a form of subjectivism, phenomenologists argue that the scientific ideal of a purely objective third person is a fantasy and a falsity. The perspective and presuppositions of the scientist must be articulated and taken into account in the design of the experiment and the interpretation of its results. Inasmuch as phenomenology is able to accomplish this, it can help to improve the quality of empirical scientific research. And I wrote here, a great deal of information about UFO-type experiences can be communicated through witness-created imagery, far more than an accounting of pure empirical data can tell us. But the nature of that information is still inconclusive. But it doesn't have to be. We can dive into it. In 2007, I wrote something called UFOs as a Cosmic Art Project. I also gave a lecture a long time ago called "Are the 1950s UFO Contactees Were They Charlatans or an Unrecognized Art Movement?" In the talk, I discussed the activities of the UFO contactees and their output of writing, drawings, paintings, and artifacts, and how these could be considered creative ways to get a message across. Looked at in this context, it doesn't really matter whether the inspiration comes from space people or their own imagination or a combination of the two. A broad overview of the history of UFO sightings and contact can be examined in the same way, but the problem becomes what the message, if any, could be. Most people would say that aliens are here and they've been visiting us since at least the late 40s. Some go further and insist these aliens are intimately interested in our politics, religion, and even our DNA. None of this has ever been proven in a way that most of the human race would accept as unquestionable proof. That leaves us where ufology is today. Perhaps the reason we're not getting where is that we almost always choose to look at the problem from the perspective of society where science has answered most of our questions about our world and the universe. But it's a great tool, but it's not the only one in our box. Humans express themselves in a variety of ways. When we look at razor-sharp pictures beamed to us from another planet, many of us are amazed and inspired that the human race could accomplish such a thing. We also if we see a great painting or hear a piece of music, this may affect us in other but similar ways. Things that light up the circuits of our left or right brain can touch us. Anything that can light up both is rare. And I think UFOs light up both. I stole this quote from Piet Mondrian, the artist who did those paintings there that you can see. In 1914, way back in 1914, he said, "Art is higher than reality and has no direct relation to reality. To approach the spiritual in art, one will make as little use as possible of reality because reality is opposed to the spiritual. We find ourselves in the presence of an abstract art. Art should be above reality, otherwise it would have no value for man." And I thought it'd be fun to replace that art with UFOs. UFOs are higher than reality to have no direct relation to reality. To approach the spiritual in UFO study, this is a little bombastic, but I'm trying to make a point. One will make as little use as possible of reality because reality is opposed to the spiritual. We find ourselves in the presence of an abstract phenomenon. UFO study should be above reality, otherwise it would have no value for man. And by above reality, I'm talking about art and perception, because I've been talking about this co-creation thing for a while that I see in the UFO field. And we add as much to the experience, I think, as the experience is presented to us. So we don't see things as they are. We see things as we are. We have to remember that. I interviewed a guy on my show once that had put hot air balloons, had launched a whole bunch of them in a little town in California sometime in the 70s to see what would happen. And he said, and then they monitored, the radio and all that to see what was happening. And he said it ranged everywhere from people saying, "Who's launching all these hot air balloons," miniature ones, like with those Chinese lanterns, to, "Oh my God, there's a fleet of UFOs invading." People, depending on what their personality or their background was, that's what they would report. And when I asked him about this, he said, most of what you're seeing, you're actually imagining and consists of what you're filling in based on patterns you expect. When something happens that you don't expect, very often you won't see it at all. Or you will make up your own narrative and sense of it, because we need to make sense of things. It's part of our evolutionary programming. Just like this guy Donald Hoffman says. He's a professor. You guys probably all have heard of him at this point. Professor of cognitive science at UC Irvine, and he wrote a book called Visual Intelligence: How We Create What We See. His model of perception says humans have developed a sense of reality that's rooted in our survival, rather than what's there, the reality of what's there. Our ways of seeing were not evolved to see things as they are, but to see things in a way that ensured fitness for the species, survival, reproduction, food, etc., dangers. And he actually created a set of equations trying to take into account everything that might happen to a given group of, say, lions living in Africa. How much food is there? Are there hunters or poachers? Is there environmental degradation? All that. And he ran all these, ran actual data through this to find out if it actually made sense. And then he ran a bunch of other, and it fit with his equations. And the other thing, then what he did was here, let me read this so I get it right. He tested this equation to make sure that it was consistent with real data, and then started to run computer simulations of differing scenarios. After he ran them, he said, and this is a quote, "Across thousands of simulated trials, fitness or survival trumped reality in every case. The organisms that only saw what was best for their survival beat out the rest that saw reality as it was, or partially as it was." So he actually compared, oh, I'm going backwards. Sorry. He compared our experience of the world to a computer screen, your computer screen. All those things you see on the screen are not the computer. They're just a representation of the computer. It's not the integrated circuits and the wiring and the power supply and the disk drive and all that stuff. Because that's not important to us. What's important to us is what we can do with that information, and that's what the screen shows us. So he said that our senses and our perceptions are not there to show us reality. It's there to hide the reality and to keep us alive. And we have to keep that in mind while we're looking at these things. Oh, okay. I jumped over one. I think that this thought experiment is also germane to what we're discussing here. In, I think sometime in the 80s, I don't have the date on here. Anyway, Frank Johnson, a philosopher, wrote an essay called Epiphenomenal Qualia. He discussed a hypothetical scientist named Mary who was locked in a windowless room that could only gather information about the outside world through a sophisticated set of scientific instruments. She had to look at the world outside from a black and white room with a black and white television monitor. A thought experiment. She specializes in the neurophysiology of vision it acquires. Let us suppose all the physical information there is to obtain about what goes on when we see ripe tomatoes or the sky, or use terms like red or blue and so on. She discovers, for example, just which wavelength combinations from the sky stimulate the retina, and exactly how this produces via the central nervous system the contraction of the vocal cords and expulsion of air from the lungs that results in the uttering of the sentence, "The sky is blue." But what will happen when Mary is released from her black and white room or is given a color television monitor? Will she learn anything or not? So what Jackson was doing here is proposing that our senses and how the information is processed by our brains convey an entirely separate experience of the physical world than any amount of quantitative data can help to convey. He theorizes that complete experience of the physical world is not possible simply by measuring it or looking at rows of data. So when Mary is released into the outside world, will she know all there is to know about the physical world as experienced by her senses, simply by collecting all the information she could beforehand? The act of smelling a flower or hearing the crash of the surf cannot be perfectly described in language or numbers, and neither can a UFO experience. The best that pure information can hope to achieve is an approximation. One popular reply to that question of what she will do is that she gains new acquaintance with what she already knew. Her world opens up. She knows that there's apples in the sky and all that, but actually experiencing it is completely different. It may not even be describable in the language that she has. So before any of us have an experience of the paranormal or a sighting of a UFO or interaction with it, we're all in Mary's room. So the witness or experiencer is now the artist who has to communicate this. And they often can't put it into words. I've heard this many times from people. So let's think of a UFO or some other paranormal experience as an information-rich event that the mind organizes into its version of reality. I thought this quote from Jacques Vallée was a nice transition into what we're going to talk about next. We live in society that's oriented towards technology. When we see something unusual in the sky, we think of it in physical terms, like we said at the beginning of this talk. How is it manufactured? What makes it tick? What's its propulsion system? We tend to assume that the physical phenomenon is the most important aspect, and everything else is just a side effect. But perhaps we're facing something that is basically a social technology. The most important effects of UFO technology are the social ones, or the personal ones, and not the physical ones. In other words, the physical reality may serve as only a kind of triggering device to provide images for the witnesses to report. These perceptions are manipulated to create certain kinds of social effects. I think we manipulate them as well, and I would deviate from Blay on that point. There's a wonderful quote from the book Angels and Aliens from 1993 by Keith Thompson, who's just released another book, UFOs and the Mythic Imagination. And the quote was, I hope you can't hear that leaf blower thing. And the quote was, many UFO witnesses emerge from their sighting or experience with or close encounter with a surrealistic appreciation that the world is filled with enormous vistas and abysses. It is as if they have glimpsed the edge of reality so precisely defined by the surrealist, and now can never go back to the mechanistic Newtonian world, absent of depth, beauty, significance, and soul. In contrast, both extremes of the UFO debate, proponents and debunkers, seem committed to forcing witness interpretations into narrow boxes that witnesses themselves tend to see as inadequate. And if they see it as inadequate, how can they describe it? So why is this important? Why is it important to me? Why should it be important to you listening to me today? As we've described previously, reality exists in our minds and nervous systems and memories, at least our experienced reality. And I think this cameras, video, and other instruments are extensions of our senses, not independent conscious witnesses to reality. Our consciousness adds so much to the experience, and it does not mean it's wrong. In fact, it might be more accurate. When faced with an unfamiliar situation, the mind or our memory will fill in the details or even an entire experience. And we're subject to our language, our culture, and our genetics. We are sort of in that box, and there's not too many ways to break out of it except to use something that is not language-based, which we'll talk about here. And most importantly, many people have had extraordinary experiences, often have their lives changed forever. Data can't do that. Yeah, can't be accounted for with simple data. What I'm saying here is that these effects, these emotional effects, these effects that deeply sometimes have deep significance for us, is a reality. I mean, it's a reality just as me sitting here knocking on the table here. It exists as a reality in our psyches. So let's talk about art a bit, even though I've got 10 minutes. Let's talk about caricatures by using this Pablo Picasso painting or portrait. We may create characters of realities when we're faced with unfamiliar input. Perhaps the ideas we have about UFOs are also a caricature. And the definition of a caricature is a rendered image showing the features of its subject in a simplified or exaggerated way through sketching, pencil strokes, or other artistic techniques. In literature, a caricature is a description of a person using exaggeration of some characteristics and oversimplification of others. I think this is, it's been proven this is how our memory works as well. So, when somebody sees a UFO, their memory of it and their impression of it is an exaggeration of some of the things that they saw. There may be some characteristics they completely miss because they're being stunned at the time. And you can see this, what I was saying about exaggeration of characteristics. Now that's a picture of that woman, Paul Eluard's wife, in real life, but the picture of her looks like a completely different person. I mean, it looks like her, but she actually looks like a fun person to hang out with. And I think that's what Picasso was trying to convey. Let's talk about some art. This is the Feast of, actually, Samhain, I think is how it's pronounced, at least one of the pronunciations, by surrealist artist Leonora Carrington. Carrington was painted in 1951. The reason I'm doing this is, one, my art history background, and two, I'm trying to convey to you that we look at this painting and we get information from it that is not describable. The information and the feeling stays with us because of the imagery and the juxtaposition of the different imagery and the colors, everything. There are themes of transition and liminality in this painting, such as the dark and light spheres in the sky, and the translucent film around the upper floating figure, which all revolve around ideas of death and rebirth, harvest and changing the seasons. This is Samhain is the fall, Celtic fall celebration. The objects in the sky are echoed in the figures in the lower right, as well as the black and white birds perched near them. There are also themes of alchemical transformation from dark to light, or the opposite, and the shedding or transformation from old identities, best represented by the diaphanous shroud with a sleeping or deceased face at the lower left. If you look really carefully, you can see a little face down there. And there's the wildness of the animals. So there is the symbolism here is much deeper than I have described, and so are people's UFO experiences, some of them. I wanted to put this in because I wanted to show that this has been going on for a long time, and also talk about the effect of light. This depicts the execution of a Buddhist saint or figure in, I believe it was the 15th century or 16th, but the tale is that he was going to be executed on this beach, and an object appeared shooting beams out of it. It freaked everybody out and saved the Buddhist saint or priest, or whatever you want to call him. There he is in the middle, meditating. Yeah, light and the extraordinary experience. A lot of people that have a UFO experience or an encounter experience with something that seems like it's extraterrestrial or an alien describe light. A lot of things to do with light, bright lights, especially UFOs, are flying through the sky. It's almost like an advertising sign. They really want you to notice. And anything numinous tends to be luminous, at least in our experience. I think that's why Catholic churches have these stained glass windows. It is grabbing your attention and holding it with light. Just like this, there's a beam of light coming out of that cloud. Some would say it was a UFO. What those are little faces of angels in the cloud, and they couldn't depict God, so they just used a round cloud. Now, where they got the imagery for the round cloud, I do not know. But just because something is round and has a beam shooting out of it does not mean it's a UFO. I think that's a cultural thing that we're used to, and that's the first thing we jump to. Could be, but also maybe not. Why I mentioned light. This is a painting by Henry Osawa Tanner, who was an African-American artist, lived from 1859 to 1937. He created this painting of the Annunciation when Mary hears from the angel Gabriel that she's pregnant with Jesus. Now, most of the paintings we know of, there's like a Mary sitting there looking all surprised and an angel coming in, probably with trumpets and who knows what to announce this. This painting, I don't know why he did this. I would really like to delve into it. He depicted the angel as just a shaft of golden light. And to me, this has a lot of similarities to people saying they saw light in their room or on the road or in the sky, and that grabbed their attention and some kind of interaction ensues. with this light that gets your attention. Like this one. This is from a sighting in 1975. There's light. There's light getting this guy's attention. It's this object that went up into the clouds and passed through them, he said. And we get a nice depiction of that cloud being lit up by the object. This is pretty interesting. This is not, the person that drew this said that this wasn't a direct example of what they had seen or what they were experiencing, but it was what the best approximation they could give in a drawing, in a piece of art. And apparently this thing is creating a crop circle. Anti-gravitational fields are included that allow the craft to access time. This is a painting that I have that was given to me by the artist James Pike, who is has been experiencing UFO and visitation phenomena for about 10 or 15 years. This is a place, this is in Santa Barbara where he lives. And that is something he says he saw in the sky with, here, I'll go to the next one. This giant ship that had a bunch of little beings all in the windows looking at him. And that little, again, let me go back to the last one. At the very, oh, there's a line in there. At the very lowest lower left, that's where that detail is from. That's him standing in the yard with his dog and 3 or 4 beings and these boomerang-shaped craft, he says, that visit him. And those are all houses with driveways going to them. It almost looks like an Aboriginal painting. That's another one of his paintings. He says he doesn't want to sell this because it's very personal to him, and it's everything that's ever happened to him depicted in one painting through the eyes of these beings that he sees. The classic gray. You can actually see down in the corner there, I think, that painting I just showed you. It's the same scene on the lower right there. He actually wrote in there, on board the mothership, September 8th, 2016, 2:30 a.m. That's a sketch that my late friend Regan Lee gave to me because she described this. Hey, Miles, if I run over, is that a problem?
Not a problem at all.
Okay.
You just go as long as you want to go.
Thank you. Well, I think we're like 3/4 or way, a bit more of the way through it.
Okay.
But I really want to show these pieces of artwork to show that you look at this art and you're going to get a feeling of what happened to somebody in a way that they can't even describe to you verbally. And that, I think, is important. Here's what that Regan wrote to me. She sent me a note along with this. This is what she said. It's a sketch of a being or a creature or an alien or something I saw when I was about 4 years old. We lived in LA at the time. She actually lived basically a couple miles from where I am right now. There was a den with French doors leading out to a patio and yard. I found myself in that room very late at night. It was very dark. Why I was in that room alone, I have no idea. Didn't make sense to me. It still doesn't. My memory of it is me in that room, and I looked out through the French doors to see this creature standing there. He or it or whatever it was messing around with what I thought was our hose, our garden hose. I remember being angry at this thing. I was mad he was in our yard using our things. He saw me. And it was the thing was so malevolent. He pointed the hose at me, and turned out it wasn't the garden hose, but some kind of wand or gun type thing he was holding. It was almost like a cartoon. His eyes were glowing red. I think this was in the early 60s. His eyes were glowing red, but I couldn't see his face, just those red eyes. And he was very angry I had seen him. I remember screaming a lot. I had other experiences in that house, and more experiences a few blocks away. And she still had up to the end of her life last year. Oh, I didn't want to show this, but I won't show all of it. This is by I've shown some of this, some of his work in another of my talks. But to me, this work by Finn Hanley is completely impressive because it's the closest I think people can get to actually having a UFO sighting. He talks to witnesses, gets absolutely every last detail from them, and then shows him what he's working on his computer animation and says, is this right? Is this close to what you saw? And he goes back and forth with them, sometimes for weeks, till he has it down as almost exactly as he can get it to show on video. I think if people could, and he doesn't put in narration, he doesn't put in music, all he puts in are the sound effects of what was going on at the time. And this one is kind of fascinating to me because it has the Oz effect. Here, I'll play it, but not the whole thing. I'll probably jump around. So these, the witness and another guy were guards at a solar plant. Yeah, the construction of a new solar power plant. This was around sunset. They'd pulled off the road basically to hang out and talk. And as they sat there, just past sundown, you can you hear the wind? He actually put a wind effect on this because there was a very strong wind. And as they sat there and talked with the stars coming out, such good animation too. There's the cars sitting there. Guard cars. Yeah, we got a little time. I'll just try and play this through because it's very effective with the wind noise and setting up of the. Then there's POVs from the. This is from the witness that gave the report, and there's his friend sitting in the other truck. If you've ever been out in the desert out in northern New Mexico or Arizona, you know about these winds. And then some lights appeared in the sky, hovering lights started to move. And then he said it went silent. The wind stopped. As these lights came over, these blinking lights. Hope you can hear that. You can hear his footsteps, but the wind was gone, or it was very much diminished. So they're kind of amazed looking at this. And then just as these pass, something else came into their view and startled them. That. This is exactly as he described it. He also said at one point you couldn't see the ship anymore. It was just the row of lights. He could see right through it. He said he took pictures, but nothing came out on his camera because he said it was cheap. I'm thinking nothing came out of his camera because maybe his camera couldn't see it. So he said it moved very slowly across the sky. And he says it with the size, he didn't know exactly, but it seemed like the size of an aircraft carrier or bigger. Absolutely huge. Yeah, and then he texted with his mom about it while it was going on. And then as it disappeared over the mountains in the distance. You can see the star through it. And yeah, he said, I don't know if it was cloaking or what, but the lights kept going. Yeah, he said he wanted to chase it, but he decided not to. He just sat and watched it. And then as it disappeared over the mountains, he said the wind came back. Or at least the sound of the wind. I'm not even sure if things were blowing around while this was happening. I would assume not. Anyway. Completely, if you want to get as close to the experience of seeing a UFO as possible, I think Finn Hanley's animations are really good for that. Anyway, we go on to the next. Here we are. So why is art important? The experience of observing or interacting with UFO phenomena is subjective, but it can be communicated through image in ways that language cannot. As I've just said, the information gleaned from these depictions may not be suited to a qualitative database or quantitative. You can't really put them in a database. I guess you could. Some of the things, how did you feel? What happened later? Did it change your life? Things like that are not normally asked of UFO witnesses. So if we do have this information, not just any researcher will be able to make sense of it. Some of the art and some of the impressions, they won't be able to collate them into a repository. I guess they could for analysis, but it would be plain language. So maybe an AI assists and some meta-analysis of all this data will reveal patterns that we did not know before, based on people's impressions, their emotions, their fear, love, all these things. And if we do get this information, it should be open to continual refinement and evolution, just like any other scientific study, actually. The phenomenological treatment, as I talked about before, I didn't mention Edmund Husserl, who was the founder of phenomenology, German philosopher from the 19th, early 20th centuries. The treatment of this information as gained from the witnesses may reveal underlying patterns, but whether this will be an adjunct to scientific research remains to be seen. It might be separate. Should be equal, but might be separate. But actually what may transpire is an admixture of science and the arts, the left and right brain, which would be amazing, because I think that's what's going on when a witness has a UFO experience. So what should we do with this information? If we listen and carefully study the witness experiences as it is described and especially drawn, we may get clues to the thing in itself. What is causing UFO reports? I think that's the important question. What causes UFO reports? Not what are UFOs or where do they come from? What causes the reports? I think that's a very important question. And we got to get rid of our preconceptions, the ETH, and anything else that we have, and not filter for biases. Because we're already getting filtering from the witness. And I think that filtering is actually valuable. Some researchers recently have said the human body is a readout device, but they're talking about a physical transformation or injury. We're not. We're looking at a change in the psyche, a subtle or profound change in the person's psyche, personality, life, etc. And by looking at this anecdotal information, the right brain transformational, oblique, and even poetic data, we may get clues as to the stimulus that causes UFO and abduction reports. I wrote some notes here I'd like to read, a couple paragraphs. I've looked for studies including subjective effects of UFO encounter. Although these issues are mentioned, they're not normally cataloged, not really. Whatever it is that is behind the UFOs and other assorted subjects we assign to the category of the paranormal do not want to be pigeonholed. To those that pay attention, the art exhibit is ever-changing and hits close to home. Fear, joy, wonder, inquisitiveness, and even sex and reproduction are all part of the UFO mix. The non-human intelligences knocking at our collective consciousness may have no other message than look, think, or perhaps you don't know everything. Ultimately, what the UFO subject does is throw a mirror in front of us and asks us to look at what we are and how we perceive our reality, which is, of course, one of the things that great art does or is supposed to do. I'll end with this quote from Whitley Strieber. He said, "I know all of this sounds fictional, all of his UFO stuff, all of his experiences, and other people's experiences. Of course it does. I don't think it is, though. I think that I'm describing things that we will see and understand more clearly as we draw closer to the visitors and thus to our own real place in the world." And I think that's a profound thing to say. And it involves transformation on our part too. So I think that's the end of it. Thank you. You there, Miles? Are we taking?
Yeah, I'm here. I love that. I love that image. That's really cool.
I can't hear you.
I'm not
I
sure.
don't know if that's me or you.
My mic is on. Testing 1, 2, 3.
Maybe if I hit stop share or something, that'll work. Okay. Oh, I turned the volume down.
Okay,
There we go. I turned it down after I played the video with the wind in it.
gotcha. Yeah.
So that's the first time I've given that talk in that format and with all the new stuff. Hope it made sense.
It did, and as always, a lot of interesting threads to pull on. You mentioned Harley Rutledge as a UFO witness turned scientific investigator who went out into the field. Of course, I was immediately reminded of the non-scientist who often is branded as not being very scientific, even though he was obviously trying to be, and that would be Ray Stanford, who you've of course interviewed, who tried to do a lot of that same kind of in the field stuff, though from a specific location. I always like to bring him up because of him being associated with Austin, Texas, and having tried to do some of that kind of instrumented technological research. But it also just as a weird reminder, one of my friends who saw him speak when this friend was a child and saw him speak in like the 70s at his school or somewhere, where he was talking about his art. And he, Ray Stanford, like many people, is a painter, and also claimed psychic experiences and whatnot. But there is one comment and question on, and were being encouraged to continue when you were asking what.
Yeah, I brought the comment, the chat room up. So yeah, thank you, Stu.
And Allison asks, it is sort of implied here, but I wanted to ask, is research into ghosts and spirits the same as research into the UFO phenomenon?
I think there's a lot of similarities, but there's differences too. I think that people that are interested in ghosts and spirits, they're stuck in, as I think my friend Susan Demeter calls it, the dead person hypothesis, DPH. And if you can unhook from that model, other possibilities emerge about time, windows through time, or that are possibly opened by significance to the person that is there, or the person that is witnessing it, or whatever. I think there is some interaction and co-creation going on in some of these spirit and ghost things, but others are just like a film loop going. So, but I think also that, and probably paranormal researchers and ghost hunters do this too, that the more emotion and meaning was associated with whatever haunting is going on, the more likely that is to cause a haunting or a spirit event. So yeah, and it's just like paranormal research. When people are looking at endless Zener cards and trying to guess whether there's a star or a wavy line or whatever across, eventually they get bored and the effect goes away because they're not engaged. And so I think a lot of this is, including the UFO thing, is very much involved with our inner life and our emotions and our feelings and our beliefs.
And I think that's really where the idea of co-creation that you and others have explored is so central to this, because as you talked about, whether it's Donald Hoffman or just recognizing how much of our quote unquote experience of reality is manufactured by the wetware and our expectations, our enculturation.
Yeah,
it has always been this big question about especially when it comes to the high strangeness aspect, the weirdness aspects of UFO close encounters and in other paranormal encounters. To what degree if there is a consciousness there, is it co-creating, or is it imposing its imagery, its appearance on the witness, and or how much are we doing? And obviously it seems most likely to be a combination of both. And
Yeah.
it seems like it's just so hard for so many people. It seems. I do think it's getting easier. I think there really is.
Yeah, the either or is disappearing.
They're finally adopting the excluded middle. But yeah, no, I think people are finally realizing, like if they see something, it's just like when they're interpreting a dream, they're like, oh, I think I know where that image came from. Like it still may have importance and significance, and it still may have the meaningfulness behind it may have been started by the phenomenon, perhaps. But it again, I think it's a two-way street.
Yeah.
And
go ahead, finish.
Oh, just the idea of caricature as a analogy for what we're seeing is, yeah, this gross representation of these things, and that the Tao that can be described is not the eternal Tao. Like, we're experiencing these really profound, fantastical things,
yeah,
and we're grasping at straws. Also, just I really am curious, like as you are, about that artist that created the picture of Mary, I guess, with the pillar of light representing an angel, and your comment about, and I know more people are starting to really notice this idea of, why do UFOs have lights on them? Like, if they're really trying to be stealthy, they're not. And at least, I mean, obviously there are cases where
they're advertising themselves,
right. Either it's look here or stay back, or whatever. But it seems like there's definitely notice me, take a look here. And on a more recent connection to that, this talk about the Langley Air Force Base drone swarm incidents with these 20-foot, allegedly 20-foot drones that could go 100 miles per hour, thousands of feet, and that were being launched and absorbed by a mothership, quote unquote. They taught the military are just quick to say doesn't exhibit hostile intent, and they don't think that they were necessarily spying because they had lights,
Yeah.
And
also, who knows if they were drones with props and all that stuff? It just might be what people think, expect, or whatever, and that's what it becomes. I didn't even talk about John Wheeler and the participatory anthropic principle thing about information theory. I thought that would have just been too much. But yeah, his idea was nothing exists except with a consciousness to perceive it. And he was a Nobel Prize winning physicist. Near the end of his life, he just said, maybe the universe reality is pure information, and the only reason we talk to each other and the car out there is beeping and and food tastes good and all that is because we're interacting with that information at a level that we're not even aware of, but it creates this reality that we're in.
And that's where I'm at with psychic anomalous cognition and psi phenomena, and
I don't think he meant this literally 100% either.
But it does seem like so much of psi phenomena, and probably some of the weirder elements of these UFO close encounters, involve people drawing information out of the ether, out of the informational fabric of the universe, and that is not part of our normal. Telepathy is not necessarily part of our daily experience for most people. And your comment about, and I think this has kind of come about because of papers published about Skinwalker Ranch, and this idea of humans as persons as sensors. And while, as you say, those examples are intended like, oh, well, you can get physiological data how the body is responding. Well, but it just, to me, it's also just the human, the subjective experience of the person is their censored data, and it is valid and important and can be quantified, can be categorized, can be collated and collected.
not as easily, but now we've got, we've got AI or just even anything. They'll just go through. It's like, how many of these say love? How many of them say hate? How many of them say fear? How many of them say, um, my son left, or my marriage broke apart, or whatever. All these things. How does that happen? When does it happen? How deeply are people affected? Is it, it seems like people are more affected the closer that the phenomenon is. Not just, it's like, oh my God, it's closer, but they have more effects. I mean, if a balloon comes close to you, go, oh wow, that's a wonderful balloon. If it's far away, you go, oh, that's a balloon. But
Right.
UFO gets close to you, all kinds of weird things start to happen to people.
I'm glad you gave the detail, the close-up detail on the Pike's art. I've seen that print in your home, and or the original, and I don't know if I realized that there were little beings along the line separating
windows or whatever in that mothership thing. And he's described what's happened to him to me, but it doesn't really jibe with what I see in his paintings. That sort of does, but his art description, his art is different than his verbal description, and the verbal description is not everything that goes on. So when I look at his art, I'm getting information from that art that I, subconsciously, and also, brings up questions for me. And I've asked him some of these questions. He's explained it. But the thing is, it's like, he won't until I ask about it. He doesn't even remember some of the stuff he put in his painting till he looks at it, goes, oh yeah, that thing. And so he's communicating at a complete, there's an entire book's worth of information in that image. I could write probably a 100-page book just on that painting.
That other one by him that you showed, I don't know if I'd seen that before. That is just gorgeous, with the being and the eyes.
Oh yeah,
some great stuff. Folks, if you have any final questions for Greg, please feel free to type them into the chat there. Allison says, thank you for that answer. It makes a lot of sense. And what a great lecture. Totally agree. You also, man, there's just so much, there's so many aspects to this phenomenon. And that's why I encourage people to find that part that most interests them, because I do think we all have something to contribute to this subject. And even if it seems daunting and like, oh, well, there's nothing new to discover. I mean, obviously there are things, but there's so many threads to pull on again. And I just really am constantly reinvigorated in looking into this phenomenon, even as there are times where I'm frustrated by the prevailing dialogue.
Yeah, some people, it's just. I told someone, if you're not careful, it's the UFO subject will grab a hold of that loose thread you have and just pull it and unravel you, if you allow it to.
Yeah.
And I've seen it. It's happened to me. So
right. Yeah, like I mentioned, first meeting you back in the 1990s, and here we are decades later, and we're both still interested in that. Let's see. Stuart, I think we'll hold off on any long spiels for now, but again, any short questions for
you can post it in the comment if you want, and then we can copy and paste it and look at it later.
Sure.
I gotta go take care of my dad here right after we're done. Oh yeah, okay, Stu, thanks. Please do.
Yeah. And yes, I know how I can put y'all in contact if necessary. And thank you all for watching and participating. Really appreciate it. Folks can go to Greg's website for his radio show and podcast, or Radio Misterioso.com. You can also go to Defies Language.com. And we, of course, in the show notes for this lecture, have a link to our Anomaly Archives page, where we've got a ton of great links, including all kinds of videos of Greg, including his recent appearances on Jeffrey Mishlov's new Thinking Aloud and other appearances. Great stuff. And I just want to let folks know, of course, next month we've got coming up a presentation by, where did I put that? Our next presenter is going to be Joe Green on a theoretical approach to conspiratorial thinking. That's going to be Saturday, November 16th at 7 p.m. And of course, we'll have information on the website and the Patreon. And of course, all three of us, Greg, myself, and Joe, are quoted in a New York Times op-ed from last August, or August of 2023, talking about conspiracy theory. And of course, that's not something we're discussing in today's lecture, but that is an integral part of looking into this, because inevitably you butt up against this. Well, why are the authorities telling us everything? Not that you should necessarily look to the authorities to tell you the truth, but that's the nature of humanity, right? You're supposed to be able to ask and interrogate authority and ask questions, but you might not always like the answer. So, well, thank you so much, Greg. Really appreciate your time, and
thanks for giving me the opportunity. I really wanted to start pushing in this direction because it's something I'm writing about right now.
Absolutely. Well, stick around, Greg, and I'll talk to you after we end here. But thank you all for joining us. Appreciate it. Have a good night. And of course, you can view all the growing back catalog of monthly lectures by going to the patreon.com/anomalyarchives and also the anomalyarchives.org website. Good night.